means of attack Pearl Harbor by air.
Ask not what your country can do.
Kennedy has been shot.
One small step for man.
These truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In 1998, the people of Paris began to count in public the remaining days of the 20th century. The countdown sign was mounted on what had become a monument to the technological progress of the 1800s, the Eiffel Tower. When it was built as the centerpiece of the Universal Exposition of 1889, Gustave Eiffel's construction was the tallest in the world, a symbol built with sweat and pig iron of how high man could reach.
Ignition sequence start. Liftoff.
Now, when man has gone to the moon and his machines have reached beyond that to Mars, science and technology have given us new ideas of the possible.
Yeah, everything looks good here.
In the early 1960s, the Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan suggested that advanced communications would shrink the world into a global village. Nothing has proved McLuhan's point quite like the Internet. Through the Internet, any kind of information is available to anybody, anywhere, at any time.
Yeah, I'm going to check my mail, and I'm also going to check my portfolio of my stocks, and you just log it into the computer, and it'll update every single day on the market, see how your stocks are doing.
Developed for military purposes during the Cold War, the Internet went commercial in 1990. Today, information crosses national and ideological borders in a twinkling and links people in a worldwide web.
Sometimes you even can find some friends through internet. I found some in Australia.
The internet is on a scale of inventions that changed everything, probably somewhere right after the invention of language. It is an incredibly powerful tool. The internet works equally as well in the middle of the third world as it does in the middle of Wall Street. You have a device that for the lowest possible cost can reach anyone on the surface of the earth.
So every day, the edge of the internet expands outward into new space, new territory.
Vince Cerf is one of the Internet's inventors.
I think back to the end of the 19th century often now, imagining what must it have been like for someone sitting in 1898. Very close into the future, Kitty Hawk coming in 1903, Einstein's paper in 1905. What is awaiting that person is a transformation of the way we live. So here we are, sitting on the threshold of the 21st century. Imagine what Kitty Hawks are just on the other side of that threshold. I can hardly wait.
Science and technology have taken us on quite a journey through the century. Young Americans cannot remember a time when the automobile, the telephone, movies, radio, and television seemed revolutionary. And many older Americans are still mystified by the landscape of the Internet. In this concluding episode, we'll see how advances in communication technology have transformed the way that Americans see their role in the world, their government, their ideas of democracy, and certainly their popular culture. Through the century, America experienced the national triumph and the personal tragedies of 2 world wars, Korea and Vietnam. Near the beginning of the century, American soldiers fought in the war to end all wars. And yet, as the next century got closer, they were still fighting. 2 weeks before New Year's Eve, the United States had once again bombed the capital of Iraq. It was the second time in a decade that American bombs and Iraqi anti-aircraft fire had lit up the night sky over Baghdad. The first time in January 1991 marked the beginning of the Gulf War, precipitated by the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein. In August 1990, he had invaded the oil-rich next-door kingdom of Kuwait, once part of Iraq.
This will not stand. This will not stand, this aggression against Kuwait.
Kuwait was gone. It became clear we were going to have to dispatch American troops to the Gulf and make sure the invasion didn't go any further.
President Bush put together an alliance of more than 24 countries and started to move 500,000 men and almost 4 million tons of equipment halfway around the world to Saudi Arabia.
The whole world had come together to say that these countries that continued to ignore the lessons of the past, ignore the promise of democracy, they were going against the prevailing will of the entire world.
Many Americans believe that this country was fighting a war to make the world safe for democracy, as it had in 1917, when President Wilson sent troops to Europe. When the United States entered the First World War, the country's military strength consisted of 50 planes and enough ammunition for only 9 hours of bombardment. At the other end of the century, when over there meant the Persian Gulf, the United States was the greatest military force on earth. And after the humiliating defeat in Vietnam 20 years earlier, President Bush was ready to use America's overwhelming power. For a month, so-called smart bombs rained down on Iraqi targets. The technology would have been science fiction to people at the turn of the century, but the purpose of bombing hadn't changed much since the First World War.
In the First World War, there was the first exploitation of aerial bombardment of civilian populations. It was haphazard as a function of the technology of the day. But it worked to terrorize a population and to try to destroy commercial and political centers of power.
And so it did in Baghdad. Within a few days, parts of the Iraqi capital lay in ruins. As it turned out, smart bombs weren't always so smart after all. Like their low-tech predecessors, they killed civilians just as effectively as they showered death on Iraqi soldiers, who shivered in their bunkers. Drier, but probably no less fearful than the soldiers in World War I.
At all times of the day, from morning till night, there's a huge sound of machine guns, bombs, planes in the air. The shelling practically never stops. They go to maybe a yard from you, maybe 100 yards from you. It comes splash right at the feet and they're blown to pieces.
By February the 15th, 1991, the Allied air raids had destroyed 1/3 of Iraqi armor, and still Saddam Hussein refused to leave Kuwait.
The prestige of the United States had been put on this. And frankly, the prospect for the future at the end of the Cold War had been put on the line.
The coalition geared up for a ground assault to liberate Kuwait and secure its oil supplies. General Powell wanted to rally worldwide public opinion to the Allied cause.
I needed something that would essentially say to the American people and to the troops and to all of our allies and to our enemy, all watching instantaneously in television, real time, something that would grab them.
Our strategy to go after this army is very, very simple. First, we're going to cut it off, and then we're going to kill it. cut it
The
off.
Pentagon restricted the flow of information, turning the 1,200 reporters in the Gulf War into a virtual propaganda machine.
If George Bush changed any minds in Baghdad tonight, they were not.
If you demonize the enemy, if you say that you're in the presence of the devil, it shouldn't be at all surprising that millions of people thought that very substantial celestial forces were on the side of the good.
Saddam Hussein did what he could to fulfill the popular role of devil. On February 23rd, as the ground campaign began to actually liberate Kuwait, Saddam Hussein set fire to more than 700 oil wells.
As we moved out and as we got closer to the border, you could see this large, dark cloud that was sitting over Kuwait. And as we drove under this cloud late in the afternoon, it was like going from day, or literally was going from day into night.
American soldiers were on their way to Kuwait in a confrontation with the army of Iraq. They'd been told this was the fourth largest military power in the world.
I had a shortwave radio that I could listen to the BBC on, and you know, there was all kinds of reports for probable casualty figures, and that definitely was on your mind.
But there was little Iraqi resistance.
They would exchange a few rounds, maybe for show or for pride, I don't know, and then their hands would come up, the flags would come out, and they would come looking for someone to surrender to.
We realized what a disorganized, discouraged, demoralized force we were fighting as a result of 30-odd days of air campaigning, and the Marines were in Kuwait City in short order. This was not just a test of America. This was a test of the international community. It was part of our effort to show a united front to the Iraqis.
Troops from Saudi Arabia were the first to be greeted by overjoyed Kuwaitis. And on June the 10th, 1991 in New York City, 4 million cheering people honored the American soldiers with the largest ticker tape parade in American history.
Americans are looking to celebrate the notion of the Persian Gulf War being a good war and a war that didn't hurt anyone except the bad guys. The Gulf War was a big hit.
Since the time that American troops had returned from World War I, and another generation of American soldiers came home from the Gulf War, and the United States had grown from a minor player to the globe's only superpower.
We are number 1 and number 2 is number 12. But at the time, we saw that there was a new world of some kind emerging, and a term we used at the time, which is not in favor any longer, the New World Order, because the New World doesn't appear to be that orderly.
For freedom-loving Americans, a fundamental question has always been, how much influence should the government have? During the century, the answer has gone from one extreme to the other.
This is the Dandy Williams Show, along with Phil Thomas,
Crystal Waters,
Brian O'Brien. Rock 100.5 The Cat. It is the Rick and Brad radio program. Good-looking morning. Should be probably about 70 for the high today, but a good-looking day. Sunshine.
Oklahoma City, April the 19th, 1995.
That day started like any other. I was out at our training center where we had training as I'm a hostage negotiator.
I was going to stop and visit with my girlfriend that morning and have coffee, and on the way into work I just decided to go ahead and head on to the office.
Priscilla Salyers worked for U.S. Customs in Oklahoma's federal building. Across the street, the Oklahoma Water Resources Board was holding its weekly meeting.
receive information regarding him.